in Coombes' case, is he now in that sort of John Cooney bracket potentially of just like, I hate the term, but face doesn't fit to a degree?
Um, I know exactly what you mean there, but I think when you kind of frame it that way, it's to overlook Nick Timoney's good season and his quality. And that's always how I try and view these things. I rate Gavin Coombes. I think he's had a massive season. Like, Jesus, the numbers he's put up for Munster are phenomenal. Probably wasn't helped by having to play second row a bit and not being able to consistently be outstanding at number 8. And to be honest, I watched every single game, obviously, all season. And Timoney, even in a losing Ulster team at times, has been consistently excellent. Just so dynamic. Defensively, breakdown is excellent. Really good change up in terms of his ball carry. He's got great acceleration, unbelievable on kick chase. Loads of things that Ireland want from their back rows as well. So I'd say it was a tight call there for that number 8 spot. I probably would have longer term thought that, if Conan or Doris go down, there's the opening for Gavin Coombes, but it's not to be. And clearly he still has a point to prove to Farrell, also to Andy, to Paul O'Connell, who's the forwards coach and would have a big say in these kind of selections. So no doubt it's very tough for him, but you've got to acknowledge that Nick Timoney has earned a return to that mix. He's been capped before, obviously, but he's been out probably more often than he's been in, and he's had to keep firing away for Ulster and being an important figure for them. He also gives you that extra bit of flexibility. He can play open side, could probably play blind side in a push, but is excellent there at number 8. The other back row coming in who wasn't there in Six Nations is Keenan Penders. Again, we saw last year how he had this great charge and nearly made the World Cup. If they'd gone for a different split, he would have been in. And again, he's a different player, has played all across the back row, excels most in my mind as a 6, and I think it's exciting to see him back in there. He's been excellent for Connacht, and again, not a good season for them, but he's been so consistently excellent in his performances and really polished across all areas of his back row play. So, I mean, it's cool for him and his brother to be in the same squad, but it's deserved his return, Keen Prendergast, I think. And while it's easy and understandable totally to look at the omissions, particularly when they're from your own province, the province you support, and you feel aggrieved on their behalf. You've watched every single game they've played and they've probably done really well, but you've got to acknowledge that other players who maybe you might not have seen as much have been really good and probably deserving of those spots in the Ireland squad.
And just to go back to Coombes, I don't think the end of the season really helped him, because I think things did tail off a little. Like, by the end of the season, he was being used as good as the season was, he was being used as an impact player off the bench. And while that has its merits and worked at times for Munster, sorry, in an ideal world, the best version of Gavin Coombes is giving Munster 60 to 80 minutes of his best every week. Like, that's what he wants. He doesn't want to be starting games on the bench, and I'm sure that's what Munster would ideally like him to be for them as well. But he did lose a grip of that starting shirt, even if it was tactical. And once you're not starting for your province, if you're not already an important part of that Ireland squad, it becomes increasingly difficult to play your way back into the picture. And as I said, we were chatting to him last week down in Munster ahead of the Glasgow game, and like, he definitely has a fair, clear idea of what Farrell and the Ireland coaches want from him. But even last week now, he didn't sound to me like a fella who was too optimistic about getting a call anytime soon.
I kind of watched some of those performances off the bench, and I was thinking maybe this could actually be his role with Ireland. He might have a better chance as one of those 6'2" guys, and he did it very well for Munster in some instances. Like, he brought it a huge 30-minute burst in the game, but you're right. Like, it may not have helped his case not to have those consistent starts. Even you look at Mike Haley, and I know he had a head injury there, and he's had other injury issues. But Simon Zebo kind of grabbed that number 15 jersey in Munster, and deservedly so, you would say. So, yeah, timing is everything, and the timing for a couple of guys in that regard wasn't ideal with that run of not being in the starting 15.
Yeah, you were right as well to flag that Paul O'Connell is the forwards coach here, because I guess Munster fans, with Coombes especially, it almost feels like a sensitive topic at this point, because he's so regularly overlooked, despite nearly always playing very well for Munster. But if Paul O'Connell badly wanted Gavin Coombes in the squad, he'd be in the squad. Like, people kind of conflate the selection or sort of mistake it for being just Andy Farrell writing down names on a list. Like, this is a collaborative discussion with your assistant coaches as well. And as you say, Nick Timoney had a fine season. Just before we move on from Coombes, like I found it interesting, I guess, the kind of juxtaposition between what people would see with Munster and what Farrell believes he needs to do more of. And I think probably going back a couple of years, it was like they felt Coombes can be impactful in kind of short bursts, but that there was too big a gap between these massive involvements in games, and that they wanted more consistent output from him across 80 minutes or across 60 minutes or whatever be the case. Also, I feel as though their perception of him as a very laid back kind of a guy, he's a bit of a messer in a good way, was that maybe he wasn't necessarily completely on top of his detail when he was involved in past squads, and obviously they kind of frown upon that. I do think he's really worked hard on all of those elements of his game. And if you look at his stats this season, which I think is what a lot of Munster fans are pointing towards, it's like he has far more game involvements now because he's basically playing as a lock, actually, in open play. Like, he has way more turnovers, I think more tackles, like all of those stats are improved. But he's probably actually, to my mind, lost a small bit of impact, because, as in just ball carrying impact, because he's trying to do so much else. And if you look at his meters gained in the URC, for example, like that stacks up. Like, he's gained, I think, 200 fewer meters roughly over the course of a season. So he's clearly trying to morph himself into being a player that will fit the mold for Andy Farrell in Ireland. But I would say that transition is just not quite complete yet. And again, I wouldn't say the door is completely shut on him, but I just think it might take another, half a provincial season before he maybe is what Ireland are looking for. Would that be a reasonable assessment of it?
The issue is it's just such an extremely competitive position, and there's so many dynamic players, those kind of players with that change up I'm mentioning that Farrell loves, where you just go, wow, that's a startling bit of explosive power that you've added there, and Coombes can bring that, but other guys can bring it massively. I think that's a good read in terms of like the workhorse stuff sometimes can diminish your ability to have that big change up. And I think Gavin Coombes has had a massive season. His workload has been unbelievable, but I think he can probably have even more impact in games, and be even more of an outstanding figure. I think 2-3 seasons ago, even he probably was more kind of startlingly good for Munster. But you're right, like Paul O'Connell, as far as I know, and he's mentioned it before, he speaks to Paul O'Connell and there's feedback there, and I mean, he'll keep firing away, and like, we shouldn't dress down his career either. He's a key guy for Munster. He's won a URC. He's played for Ireland, which in itself is an amazing achievement. And the competition in the back row means it's always going to be unbelievably tough. But as I started with, I'm excited by Timoney and Prendergast earning their returns, by Izuchukwu getting into that mix. And so often it becomes about who's not there, when the lads who've actually got that nod have really earned it with their play.
And I think that frustration is sort of magnified for Munster fans, because maybe more than any of the other provinces, there's a couple of guys that they can look at and point to and say, well, he's unlucky not to get in. Like, I thought Jeremy Loughman had an excellent end to the season, and he's not in the squad. You look at somebody like Shane Daly, and playing every game for Munster and just being so reliable week in, week out. He's not in the squad. John Hodnett's maybe another one who I think has had an excellent season for Munster. He's a player I'm a big fan of. He's not in the squad. So there's a couple that they can look at and say, well, this guy was really good for us all season, and he's not there. And Coombes is maybe just the most obvious example of that. So I think of all the provinces, they're the group of supporters that maybe have the most frustration out of this squad announcement.
Yeah, Loughman has been playing like a man possessed over the last few weeks, in fairness. He could be like a really exciting one for next season, to be honest, if he continues in that vein.